My fiancée gave my son's birthday gifts to her nephews with his name still on the tags. When I asked her to take them back, she said, "They're just toys." I'd been paying her bills for 8 months. I didn't argue. At her sister's kitchen table, I asked one question and set the ring down. Her smile disappeared. "My name is Darnell. I've worked HVAC for 12 years with the same company union rate, good benefits, steady. I own my house. Not renting, not sharing with family, not one missed payment in 6 years. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because it matters later. Caleb has been with me full-time since he was 4. His mother left. There wasn't a custody war. There wasn't a dramatic courtroom scene. She just decided she wasn't built for it, and she went. I didn't fight her on it. I picked Caleb up from my mother's house, put his bag in his room, and we figured it out. He's a quiet kid. Careful. The kind of boy who sorts all his building pieces by size before he starts building anything. Every year, starting around January, he begins his birthday countdown. Not out loud. Mostly he just gets a little more focused, a little more deliberate. Like he's been waiting for something to finally go right. That's my son. I met Renata about 18 months ago at an event through a coworker. She's charming in a room full of people, the kind of person who remembers your drink order and makes you feel like you're the only conversation happening. She worked part-time at a salon, had student loans she was managing, and was upfront early on that she was in a tight spot financially. I didn't hold that against her. 6 months in, she mentioned her car insurance was going to lapse. I added her to my policy. Just for a couple of months, we said. A few weeks after that, her phone plan. Same deal. By the time I put a ring on her finger, I was covering about $600 a month in her personal expenses, car insurance, phone, 2 charges to her salon supply account that I'd agreed to cover once and somehow never canceled. I didn't track it closely. That was my mistake, and I own it. Caleb was polite to Renata. Always said hello, answered her questions, cleared his plate when she was over for dinner. I took that as acceptance. I understand now that I was reading it wrong. Caleb wasn't warming up to her. He was watching her. There's a difference, and he understood it before I did. Caleb's birthday was on a Saturday. 3 weeks out, I planned a small party, a few people from my office, 2 of his school friends, and Renata, who was going to be there as his future stepmother. I bought the gifts early, wrapped them, wrote his name on the tags, and put them on the top shelf of our closet. Before I did, I told Renata directly, "Those boxes are Caleb's, don't touch them." She looked at me like I'd said something unnecessary. "Obviously, Darnell," she said. The Friday before his party, Renata mentioned that her sister Denise was having a casual get-together that afternoon. "Just family," she said. Her nephews hadn't seen me in a while. It would be an hour, maybe less. I said fine. That morning I loaded the car, including the gifts in the back, because I was planning to swing by a friend's place afterward to drop off a tool I'd borrowed. I didn't think twice about it. The gifts were in a bag. Renata knew they were back there. I know that now. We got to Denise's house around 2. It was a backyard thing, folding tables, a grocery store cake, kids running around. I ended up in the kitchen talking to Denise's husband about a game. Normat. Ease. Maybe 30 minutes in, I heard the sound of gift wrap being torn. I didn't register it at first because there were kids everywhere and it wasn't an unusual sound. Then one of Renata's nephews, he couldn't have been older than 7, let out a shriek from the living room. Something about a remote control car. I walked in from the kitchen. The remote control car was already out of the box. The building set was open on the floor. The jersey was being held up against one of the boys like he was checking the fit, all 3 gifts. And the tags, the handwritten tags with Caleb's name on them, were still attached to the torn wrapping paper scattered across the carpet. Renata was standing on the other side of the room. When she saw me, she didn't look surprised. She smiled at me like she was waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't raise my voice. I walked across the room to Renata and I spoke quietly enough that only she could hear me. I told her those were Caleb's gifts. She glanced at the boys, then back at me, and gave a small shrug. "They're just toys, Darnell." The boys saw them in the car and got excited. I didn't want to make a thing out of it. I told her to take them back. She said the kids had already opened them. I told her to explain to the boys that there was a mix-up and that the gifts belonged to someone else. She said she wasn't going to embarrass her sister's kids at a family party. I looked at her and asked her directly, "Did she plan this?" She didn't answer the question. Instead, she told me I was making a huge scene over nothing, that I should go get some food and calm down. Then she walked back to her family and left me standing there holding nothing. I stayed another 20 minutes because I didn't want to confirm whatever version of this story she was already writing in her head. I said goodbye to Denise, shook her husband's hand, and walked out to the car. Renata came out a few minutes later. The drive home was quiet. She tried light conversation somewhere around the 10-minute mark, something about Denise's new couch. I didn't respond. Then silence. Then, pulling into the neighborhood, she said, "I'm sorry you got upset." Not, "I'm sorry I did it." "I'm sorry you got upset." I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment. I wasn't ready to go inside. I was running through the last 14 months in my head, and I was doing it slowly, the way you do when you already know what you're going to find, but you need to see it laid out clearly before you can move. The car insurance added to my policy 6 months in, still there. The phone bill, same story. The time she asked me to cancel plans with Caleb because her sister needed help moving. The afternoon, she told Caleb his room was too loud while she was on a video call, and then referred to it as the guest room when her friend asked about the layout of the house. I had filed all of it away without labeling it. I was labeling it now. I wasn't dealing with a series of unconnected moments. I was looking at a pattern, and the pattern had been there long before tonight. I just hadn't been willing to call it what it was. The next morning, Renata came downstairs with a different energy. Not apologetic, decided. She had clearly spent the night reorganizing the situation in her head, and, in her version, the problem wasn't what she did. The problem was how I responded to it. She told me I was overreacting. She said children don't even remember specific gifts, that Caleb gets everything anyway, and that the way I'd acted in front of her family was embarrassing. Then she said that future step-parents and kids have to compromise sometimes. That was the word she used. Compromise. I let her finish. Then I asked her one question. Compromise means Caleb gives up what's his so your nephews can have more. She told me I was twisting her words. I wasn't twisting anything. I was just repeating them back without the softening. She didn't like how they sounded without it. She left the kitchen, and I heard her on the phone with her mother about 20 minutes later. I didn't try to listen. I didn't need to. Caleb was getting dropped off that afternoon by his school friend's dad. I'd already decided I wasn't going to lie to him. When he got home, I sat with him at the kitchen table and told him that the 3 gifts I'd wrapped for him, the car, the building set, the jersey, weren't going to be there at his party tomorrow. I told him there had been a mix-up and that those gifts were gone, but we'd replace them in the morning before anyone arrived. He was quiet for a moment, the way he gets when he's processing something he's already half figured out. Then he asked, "Was it Renata?" I said yes. I told him it was a mistake. He nodded slowly. Then he said, "She does stuff like that." I asked him what he meant. He thought about it. He said she finished his snacks sometimes without asking. He said she changed the channel once, when he was in the middle of a show, and when he said something, she told him he'd already seen it. He said she called his room the guest room, in front of some woman who came over once, and when he asked Renata about it later, she told him he'd misheard her. None of those things individually would hold up in any kind of argument. I knew that. Renata would call every one of them a misunderstanding, a non-issue, an example of a kid being too sensitive. But Caleb is 8 years old, and he listed them the way you list things you've been keeping track of for a while without knowing why. Careful. In order. My 8-year-old son had a longer list than I did. Caleb's party the next morning went fine. I was at the store by 8, replaced all 3 gifts before anyone arrived, and didn't say another word about it to him or anyone else. He got his remote control car. He got his building set. He got his jersey. He was happy. That part worked. What I did after everyone left was open my banking app. I wasn't in revenge mode. I want to be clear about that. I was in documentation mode, and there is a difference. Revenge is emotional. Documentation is just math. I needed to see the full picture laid out in one place, so I sat down at the kitchen table with my phone and I looked. The car insurance auto pay $180 a month, in Renata's name, running for 8 months. The phone bill $85 a month, same timeline. Then 2 charges to her salon supply account that I had agreed to cover once, about 6 months back, that were somehow still processing every month. I had forgotten they existed. And then one more thing. A charge for $240 at a restaurant I'd never been to, on a Tuesday night in March, at a time when Renata had told me she was at Denise's house helping with the kids. I sat with that last one for a while. Then I kept moving. I screenshotted everything and emailed it to my work account. Not to show anyone. Not yet. Just so it existed somewhere that wasn't only on my phone. The number, when I added it up, came out to just over $700 a month. For the last 8 months, I gave myself 72 hours. 3 days. I was not going to blow up a 14-month engagement on one bad weekend without giving the other person a real chance to fix it. But I was specific with myself about what fix it meant. Not "I'm sorry you got upset." Not a pivot to my reaction, my tone, my sensitivity, an acknowledgement that Caleb was wronged. That his gifts, with his name on the tags, were taken from him without his knowledge, and that it was wrong. That was the entire threshold. It wasn't high. I didn't think it was unreasonable. 2 days after the party, my phone started going. First, a long text from Renata saying she had talked to her mother and to Denise, and they all agreed that I had an anger problem, that I was obsessed with money, and that my inability to let small things go was going to make Caleb anxious and insecure growing up. Then this line, which I have read probably 15 times since. Your son is going to grow up thinking presents matter more than people if you keep modeling this behavior. I put the phone down. I picked it up again. I screenshotted both texts and added them to the folder. Then a follow-up came through, maybe 40 minutes later, while I still hadn't responded. Short one this time. 5 words and a demand. You need to apologize to Denise. I had gone to Denise's house with a bag of gifts for my son. I had left without them, and now I was the one who owed an apology. I didn't reply. I just added it to the folder and closed the app. The 72-hour clock was still running. I was going to let it run. I texted Maria from my office on day 2. Maria had been at a work event with me about 3 weeks before the party, the same event where I'd mentioned, out loud, that I was done shopping for Caleb's gifts. I didn't tell her everything. I just asked her to confirm what she remembered about that conversation. She texted back within the hour. Yeah, you showed me a picture of the building set. Said Caleb was going to lose his mind. I screenshotted it and added it to the folder. I also called my insurance company and the phone carrier that afternoon. Not to cancel anything yet, just to understand the exact steps what I'd need to do, how long it would take, whether there'd be any gap in coverage that could create a problem. I was methodical about it. I needed to know what the process looked like before I decided whether to start it. Day 3 arrived. The 72-hour window closed at around 7 in the evening. At 6:45, an email came through from Renata. I know it was 6:45 because I looked at the timestamp more than once. The email was 6 paragraphs long. She said she had reflected deeply. She said she understood that I was sensitive about Caleb, given their situation, a phrase that managed to reduce 4 years of solo parenting into a footnote about my emotional state. She said she accepted partial responsibility for the timing, but noted that the gifts had not yet been given to Caleb officially, and that she was only trying to make the boys happy in the moment. That word officially sat in the middle of the email like she thought it was doing something. Those tags had Caleb's name on them in my handwriting. There was nothing unofficial about it. She said she hoped I could find the generosity to move forward. She closed by asking me to cancel the insurance cancellation she had apparently noticed I'd started. Then a kissing emoji. I read it twice. I ran it against the criteria I had set for myself 3 days earlier. An acknowledgement that Caleb was wronged. That was all I had asked for. 6 paragraphs, and it wasn't in there. What was in there was a request to restore her car insurance. She wasn't apologizing for what she did to Caleb. She was apologizing that I had noticed. I closed the email. I opened the insurance app. I finished the cancellation. Then I opened the phone carrier app and started that one too. I was calm about it the same way I'd been calm about everything else since I walked out of Denise's living room. Not cold, not angry. Just finished. There's a version of this story where I gave her more time, more room, more chances to find the right words. I had given her exactly what I said I would give her, and she had used it to write 6 paragraphs about herself. I was done waiting. I called Leon that night. Leon is a friend from the union he knows. Renata knows me, has seen us together. I didn't ask him for anything except to listen. He listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a second, and then he said, "What do you need from me?" I told him I might need him to come with me to Denise's house. He said he'd be there. Renata called 2 days after the email. She said we needed to talk in person, that her family wanted to understand what was happening between us, and that it would help if we could do it together at Denise's house. I understood exactly what that was. It was a pressure play. Get me in a room surrounded by her people, let the social weight do the work, and see if I'd fold. I'd seen the version of this before, not with her specifically, but I recognized the architecture. I said I'd be there. I wore my work jacket, the one with my name on the chest. I don't know exactly why I made that choice. It wasn't calculated, or maybe it was, and I just didn't examine it too closely. I put my phone in my front pocket and I drove to Denise's house. Leon met me outside. I told him he didn't need to come in unless I asked him to. He said he'd wait by the car. Inside, it was Renata, Denise, Renata's mother Patricia, and Denise's husband in the background, who had the look of a man who would rather be anywhere else on earth. The kitchen table again. Same room where I'd talked to Denise's husband about the game 2 weeks ago, except the energy was completely different now. Renata started before I sat down fully. She told her family that I had overreacted to something small at the party, that it had been blowing up ever since, and that she needed them to help me understand she hadn't meant any harm. She said it the way people say things when they've rehearsed them smooth, even, already concluded. Patricia nodded along. Denise kept her eyes on the table. I let Renata finish. Then I asked one question. I asked Renata to tell the room, in her own words, what exactly had happened at the party. Not her intentions. Not how I'd reacted. What happened? She said the boys saw the gifts in the car, got excited, and things moved fast. She said it was an accident. I asked her if the tags were on the gifts when the boys opened them. She said she didn't remember. Denise's head came up slightly at that. I said, Denise was in the room. She remembers. I wasn't asking Denise anything. I was just saying it out loud, in front of everyone, and letting it sit there. Renata shifted and said I was making everything about money and control, that this wasn't about toys. It was about the fact that I didn't trust her and that a relationship without trust wasn't going to work. She said it like she was delivering a verdict. I let her finish again. Then I said, you mentioned money. Let's talk about money. I took my phone out of my front pocket, opened the banking app, and I slid it across the table to Denise. Not to Renata. To Denise. I asked Denise to read the line items out loud. Denise looked at me, then at the phone, then she read them. Car insurance, $180 a month. Phone bill, $85. Salon supply charges, still running. The Tuesday restaurant charge, $240. The night Renata had said she was here helping with the kids. Denise's voice got quieter as she went down the list. Then, I read one line from Renata's email. The line where she asked me to cancel the insurance cancellation. I read it flat, no editorial, and then I asked the room. If this was about toys and not money, why was the first thing Renata noticed in 3 days the car insurance? Patricia started to say something about how families have to learn to compromise, that blending a household takes patience, that Renata had always been generous with Caleb. I cut her off. Politely, but completely. I'm not asking your family for permission to protect my son. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Denise put the phone down on the table and looked at her sister. Her voice was quiet. She said, Renata. Those gifts had his name on them. Renata stared at Denise like she'd just been handed something she didn't know how to hold. Her sister. The one person in that room she had been certain of. The color in her expression shifted, and for the first time since the parking lot 2 weeks ago, she didn't have a next line ready. That's when I stood up. I reached into my jacket pocket and set the ring on the table. I didn't slide it toward her. I didn't make a speech about it. I just set it down in the center of the table where everyone could see it, and I looked at Renata and told her I hoped she found what she was looking for. I told her she had 30 days to move the car insurance and the phone bill to her own accounts. I said the combined total she'd received over the last 8 months was just under $6,000, and I wasn't asking to be paid back. I was just saying the number out loud so it was in the room. Then I said, I'm not angry. I'm just done. I picked up my phone from the table, put it back in my front pocket, and walked out. Leon was leaning against his car when I came out. He looked at my face and didn't ask anything. We stood there for a minute, and then he said, You good? I told him I was. He nodded, got in his car, and drove off. That was it. That was all I needed from him. I called Caleb from the driveway before I pulled out. Told him I was on my way home and asked if he wanted pizza for dinner. He said yes. I asked him what toppings. He said pepperoni. I told him I'd be there in 20 minutes. That was the whole conversation. That was enough. About a week later, I got one final message from Renata. Not a paragraph, not a list of grievances, not another email with 6 sections and a kissing emoji at the end. Just one word. Pathetic. Then nothing. I didn't respond. I didn't block her right away either. I just left it there and let it mean whatever she needed it to mean. Maria told me a few days after that Renata had called the office looking for me. Apparently, she was surprised I hadn't reached out. Maria didn't tell her anything. I appreciated that. The car insurance transferred on day 28. The phone bill a few days after. Both without incident, both without any further contact from Renata. The folder on my work email still exists. I haven't opened it since. About 10 days after everything, Caleb and I had a redo birthday dinner. Just the two of us at the kitchen table. The building set was spread out across one end. He'd been working on it in sections, the way he does, sorted pieces lined up in rows, before anything gets assembled. The remote control car was charging in the corner. He'd already named it. I don't remember what he named it, but I remember he told me very seriously, like it was important information I needed to have. I've thought about what the last 14 months cost me, not just the money, though the money was real. What I keep coming back to is simpler than that. I spent a year and 2 months making room for someone who looked at my son and saw a guest in his own home. I am not going to do that again. She called them just toys. I called that the end.